Hi everyone and welcome again to Python for Data Analysis course. Today we're going to start looking at how to define functions in Python. Now functions are very important for creating reusable code. And so whenever you have an operation that you would carry out multiple times, it's useful to put that in a function. And a function typically, is a piece of code that, like I said earlier, is reusable, but ideally should be used to perform a single action. And so when creating functions, you want it to be able to do just one thing and one thing alone so that you don't complicate, that function. But before we jump into creating functions and applying those functions to our data frames, what I would want to show you is, creating new columns in a data frame, and then we'll jump straight into functions. And so, like we've done in previous videos, we are going to import pandas as PD and import our hospital appointments data set, and then just inspect our data. I'm doing this so that, it becomes a habit for you to always run this and inspect your data. And then what we're going to do next is derive new columns in the data frame. So deriving it is similar to creating a new key value pair in a dictionary. And so you have your data frame, and then you have the new column name put in square brackets. And then whatever the value is, you can put that after the equal to sign. And so we're going to create a new column called new column in our DF hospital appointments data frame. And the value in each of these columns is going to be new. And so if I run this piece of code and then run head, you can see on the right here a new column that has been created. Now, if we go up, remember there was no new column here. What you can do next is you can run the df hospital appointments.info. And now that tells us that we have 15 columns in total, and it's showing new column as the 15th column. Now we can overwrite that any column, and the syntax is pretty much the same. We have our new column over here, and now we're going to put overwrite in there. So we run this, and now our new column doesn't have new again, it contains overwrite. So that's the way to, add a new column to your data set. And we'll revisit this when we, talk about applying functions to our data frame, because that will help us to put some logic, create some logic so that we can create more intelligent new columns. So, like I said earlier, functions are reusable code blocks, and the function is broken up into, several parts. So there's the DEF or def, which is the keyword that tells Python that you want to define a function. The next is the function name, which I call print argument. So you have to make it as descriptive as possible. So functions are actions that your code is going to take. So normally you can name them after the action that you want it to take. Then functions can take inputs, which are also called arguments. And then there's a colon, and then you go into the body of the argument. And so a good practice is always to have a docstring where you describe what the function does. So this function prints the input to, or prints, let's just make it simple, print argument. So this tells us what the function does. Now the three quotation signs just tell this the function that this is a docstring, and there's a lot more that you can learn about docstrings. You can Google it and then read some more about docstrings, but for now we'll not go into that. And so when I run this defines a function for me. Now to call the function, I just type in the function name, and the argument this time I'm saying it's great success. So what's going to happen is that great success is going to go into this function, and it's going to print, it's going to go into the print function inside my function. And so when I run print argument, what do we expect the output to be? The output should show great success. And so that's what we see in the output. Now, when defining functions, there's a keyword that we use that can return the result such that we can store it in a variable. Now, that keyword is return, and so I'm defining a new function here which says, rather than just print out the argument on a display for me on the screen, rather return that argument value in a format which I'm able to store in a variable. And so it's the same syntax as before, except that instead of print, we are using the return keyword. And so this time when we say return great success, you can see that now great success is in single quotes because it's a string object. And this object can be stored in a variable. Now, what we're going to do next is we're going to look at how we can apply, functions that we've created to columns of our data set. So for example, if we wanted to create, say, a new column which had, the ages of the patients between like 65 years old to 150 years old, for example, what we could do is we could create a function that would say, if our age is within a particular range, it should return 1. Or if it's in the range that we want, that's over 65 and above, it should return 1. Otherwise, it should return 0. So the code here, I'm creating a list of values from 65 all the way up to 150. And this is the code that I used. If we went through some of this in the previous lessons. And so this function, I'm using the define keyword. I'm calling it f as in for function, age 65 to 150. And the input it takes is age. So that's the argument to this function. Now it says that if this argument age, and this in is also another keyword in Python that you can use to do some comparisons, and it returns either true or false. And so it's saying that if age is in this list, age 65 to 150, return 1. So if this condition is true, the function will return 1 and it will stop running. And then if it's false, then it's going to return 0. And so I define this function and I want to test it. So I'm saying that if I put 65 here, is it going to be inside this list? And we expect it to be so. So we expect this to return a 1. And it does that. And then we can run another test and say 64 should return a 0. So what we're going to do here now is we're going to use the apply function. And what it does is I'm trying to create a new column called age 65 and over in my data set. So I'm using a key value pair. And so this is the new column name, age 65 and over. And the values, I'm using this logic. So let me explain this. First, I'm taking the age column from this DF hospital appointments. So let me just pull this out so that we can break it down easily. So if I do this, what it does is it just picks out all the ages. And then I'm going to apply this function to this column. So it's going to go through every line and say, okay, age 62. Is it in this list, age 65 to 150? If that's true, then it will put a 1 there. If that's false, it will put a 0. So over here, we'll have pretty much, I think, all zeros, because at least for the top 5 and the bottom 5 rows. So let's go ahead and apply this. So if you look at the top 5 rows, age 65 and over is 0. And if we look at the bottom 5 rows, the tail, age 65 and over is 0. Now we can do the value counts to find how many people in our data set are over 65. And we can tell that it's 14,000 out of the 110,000 odd people who are over 65. And so this brings us to the end of defining Python functions. We're going to look next at another type of function, which is called the lambda function, which you can create in line. And then we'll look at some data aggregations also in Python. So stay tuned for the next video. Thank you.